Good morning. The reading this morning will be Philippians chapter 4, verse 10 through 13. But I rejoiced in the Lord greatly that now at last you have revived your concern for me. Indeed, you were concerned before, but you lacked opportunity. Now that I speak from want, for I have learned to be content in whatever circumstances I am. I know how to get along with humble means, and I also know how to live in prosperity. In any and every circumstance, I have learned the secret of being filled and going hungry, both of having abundance and suffering need. I can do all things through him who strengthens me.
Thank you, Charles. I want to talk today about this idea of learning contentment, being content. In the book of Philippians, we're writing, to the end here of this great chapter in this great book. We're coming to the end, and I'm going to miss it. I don't mind telling you as I preach through it, and I've studied it one more time. I'm going to miss the book of Philippians, and you say, well, Harold, how can you miss it? It's like a friend to me. And these, especially these chapters, as we finish up these lessons in chapter 4, mean so much to me. Last week I talked about anxiety, being anxious, what it means to be anxious. Be anxious for nothing, but in everything by prayer and supplication. The opposite of anxiety is contentment. I'm going to say it again. The opposite of this idea of anxiety is contentment, that there is a peace in your life, that God is with you, that you have all that you need because of him. It's not saying that you can't have goals. It's not saying that you can't have something better. It's saying that right now, because of what God means to you in your life, you are not anxious, but you are content. I'm learning to be content. I want to tell you that I have not conquered this, and I don't think you have either, because I think this is something we're always growing in, and hopefully you're growing in it, I'm growing in it. I've not conquered this. I am learning in my life to be content. I told you last week that Larry called me, and he said, Dad, do you have $400? And I said, why do you need $400? He said, no, you need to go out and buy this lawnmower, a Honda lawnmower, had 2 blades, self-propelled. It dragged you across the yard, do everything. Now every time I walk through my garage, I look at my sorry lawnmower, my 1-bladed lawnmower. It's not self-propelled, it's preacher-propelled. It's not what he had. Isn't it funny how all of us, we get this thing inside of us thinking that somehow we need something more, that somehow the grass is always greener in somebody else's lawn. The lane, some of you drive like this, that lane's faster, you get over there and that lane's faster. You shop like that in a store, you always get in a lane, the lane is always faster, someone is always better, somebody always has it better. And somehow we are not content. When I was a child, my dad was in the Army, and we moved from place to place, and we settled for a few years in Tuscaloosa, Alabama. We moved from Paris, France to Tuscaloosa, Alabama. And there in Tuscaloosa, Alabama, I have some of my best childhood memories. We lived in a house at the end of a road in somewhat of it wasn't really a cul-de-sac, or it dead-ended in one part of our street, and then the street went around. And I lived at the very end of that dead end, and it dead-ended in a canal. And my brother and I would go out in that canal, this giant canal. We would fish. We'd take a little fishing pole and go fishing. We'd take watermelons, and you could bury them in that creek. It was so cold, and when you come back, the watermelons would be all cold, and we'd break those things open and share it with the neighborhood kids. We'd play baseball and ride our bicycles. We had this truck that would come through our neighborhood and spray for mosquitoes. Did you ever have one of those in your neighborhood? They'd come through and spray for bugs and mosquitoes. We'd ride behind it on our bicycles. And part of what's wrong with us today, we'd ride behind this chemical truck on our bicycles, with cards, by the way, on our bicycles, not 10 speeds, just that 1-speed bicycles. We'd have these playing cards And I know that I kind of sound like Tom Sawyer up here and the good old days. But a couple of years ago, I preached a gospel meeting in Texas, and I drove to Texas on I-20, and on my way back from Texas, I stopped in Tuscaloosa, Alabama, and I was eating at a Burger King right off the highway. And I said to the young man that was behind the counter, who was extremely uninterested in what I was saying, I said, you know, I used to go to school here when I was a little kid at a place called Skyland Elementary. And not even looking up from his order, my order, he pointed like this. And I followed his hand, and I looked across the street, and there was Highland Elementary. And I went to I got my Burger King, and I went to Highland Elementary, and I traced my way home, how I used to walk home from school. And I went to that house at the end of the street. And y'all, it was a tiny little house. It wasn't a canal, it was a drainage ditch. I'm afraid of the watermelons that we ate out of that thing. It wasn't a vast lot with trees in it. It was just a regular lot, like somebody could build a house there any day. But I was so happy as a child. I did not know that we lived in a small house, in a small room, on a small lot at the end of a small neighborhood. Because I had everything. I had everything. I had a mom and dad that loved me. I had a brother that liked me, sisters that loved me, and I had it all. I had it all. But as I sat there eating my Burger King, looking at that little house, I thought, I wonder if I'd move my family into a house like that today. I think my dad paid $9,000 for that house. It was sold, I think, not long ago for $70,000. I wish I had bought it for $9,000. Don't you ever think like that? What I'm saying is, contentment is a state of mind. It's a state of mind. It has to do with our thinking. All of these things that I've been talking about in this fourth chapter have to do with our thinking. You heard about the two teardrops that were on this river of life, and one teardrop said to the other teardrop, I'm the tear of a woman who loved a man and lost him. And the other teardrop said, I am the woman who found that man. It's interesting how we see ourselves differently in different perspectives. I found an article not long ago. It's called The Discontentment of Prosperous America, and basically it said that Americans have more now than they ever have in their life. Americans have more right now than they ever had in all of their life, but they are more discontented than they have ever been. I believe that. It said that 40 years ago, the average American's house was 1,000 square feet less. Today, it's 1,000 square feet bigger than it was 40 years ago, despite, by the way, families being smaller today. The American diet 40 years ago had 500 more calories per person 400 years ago. In fact, do you remember 40 years ago, if you made a phone call, kids right now, they have no idea. When you made a phone call, you made a circle. Do you remember that? And you had to wait, it seemed like an hour if you dialed 0. Well, we don't want to wait anymore, because I can pick up my cell phone now with a hands-free law. I can say, call Kay. My cell phone does what I say. Sometimes. Sometimes it does some weird stuff. It's amazing that we have all of this medical information in the palm of our hand. And yet we, of all people in this time, are some of the saddest, most discontented people. In fact, the article said that the average American does not realize that they live materially more comfortable than the czars of Russia did 100 years ago. We want more. I want more in my check. I want something better. I want something bigger. I've got to have something more. It is the call of America. Now, it kind of brings us to learning contentment in the book of Philippians. We're just going to look at a few verses. But the Apostle Paul, remember, he's in prison. He's in jail. And he's writing about learning to be content. And he said, listen, I've learned to be content in whatever circumstances. I know what it's like to be prosperous, to have a lot. I know what it's like to have so little. I've learned to be content. And Paul is trying, I think, to teach us a secret, and that many people have never learned, and it is the secret of how to be content, the opposite, again, of being anxious. And it comes from a group of people in Philippi. I remember a church in Macedonia that he helped start, and you can read about it in the book of Acts in Acts 16, but he starts this church and they help support him, but for some reason they have lost touch with him, and now through Epaphroditus, they have sent a gift. It's kind of a care package, probably some food and some money and some aid, some medical supplies or whatever. They have sent through Epaphroditus this care gift to Paul, and Paul writes back to the church at Philippi, and he said, thank you so much for what you've done for me. I cannot believe that you thought of me. You are so kind. And then he tells them that they need also to learn to be content like he has learned to be content. So I want to just show you three things. First of all, we need to be connected with God's people. Paul said, I rejoiced in the Lord greatly, and now at last you have revived your concern for me. Before you lacked opportunity. We don't really know how they lost touch or why they lost touch with Paul, but they lacked an opportunity, and now they're going to help him. It's interesting to me how Paul, by that benevolent gift from this group in Philippi, it meant so much to him. It's amazing what a small gift can mean to someone. A child that is struggling, a teenager that's struggling, a young couple that just got married and they're trying to put gas in their car. It's amazing how for some people just the smallest of gifts can mean just the world to them. And Paul, he said, your gift to me, it means so much to me. This is a group of people he could count on. And I wonder this morning, who do you count on? I've done many funerals in this community over almost 27 years of being here, and another almost 8 years in Fort Lauderdale. And in those funerals, one of the things that I have noticed is that people always find a support group. They always have a support group. And many times it doesn't have anything to do with the church. Sometimes it's a neighborhood support group. So there was one man that had died. I did his funeral, and he every week went to a tavern where he and his friends listened to music. And it wasn't necessarily a bar. They ate food and spent time with all these people, but he spent time in this tavern, and all these people over the years had helped him. They came to the hospital, and some of the stories they told, I thought they could put some congregations to shame because of the love and the support that they have shown this man that he didn't get from anywhere else. You got to have somebody that you can call in the middle of the night. In fact, when I wrote my small group discussion questions, I asked, who would you call at 2 o'clock in the morning? And my suggestion is call Perry Price, don't call me. But who would you call at 2 o'clock in the morning if you needed help? Who would you call? And by the way, I said that kind of tongue in cheek, but if I called Perry at 2 o'clock in the morning, he'd come. And, that's one of the people I call. I can count on Raymond. There are people right here sitting in this auditorium right now. I know if I needed you at 2 o'clock in the morning, you'd be there. If you needed me, you could call me and I would be there. I'd wake up Kay and get her over there to you. But we'd somehow get some help. But I'm saying, it's interesting that at the end of the day, we really need to think about who we want in our life as a family and how we need each other. We are always stronger together when we are apart. And we need one another. I think the church has got to stop saying that there's some kind of lone solo person on an island somewhere. We are a group, we are a family, we are people that need one another. And Paul realized that. First of all, it produced joy in his life. I put this in your outline. It brought happiness. And people bring happiness to your life when you can count on them. But not only that, it affirmed what he was doing was the right thing in ministry for them to send him a care gift, and it affirmed to him that he was doing the right thing. It was encouragement to go on. Man, you can do this. And so you need to be connected to God's people. Secondly, we need to be content. I've gotten a little bit ahead of myself here on my slide. We need to be content with what we have, the possessions or the provisions that God has given us. Not that I speak from want, for I learn to be content in whatever circumstances. I know how to get along with humble means. I also know how to live in prosperity. In every circumstance, I've learned the secret of being filled and going hungry, both of having abundance in suffering need. Paul, by the way, is talking about needs, not greeds. I wonder if we even know the difference between the two. Did you know that 100 years ago, the average American, if you ask him to write down his needs, he wrote down at least around 70 things. The average American today, if you said, write down the things that you need, they would write down over 500 things. Do we know the difference between what we need and some kind of greed in our life? We need transportation, but it doesn't have to have seat warmers and all the bells and whistles. It's great if you have that, but we might need some kind of transportation. What is it that you need? Y'all, I learned a valuable lesson at my age. Just this past week, I flew to Florida to help my mom move out of a home that she has lived in for 50 years into a one-bedroom apartment. My mama moved out of a house of about 2,000 square feet into a little apartment. And it's awesome. She doesn't have to take care of a pool, doesn't have to worry about lawn, doesn't have to worry. My mom's 84 years old. She doesn't need to worry about all those kinds of things. And so we took her out of that big house. To her, it was just a giant house. And we put her in a one-bedroom apartment. And quite frankly, it looked even big to her. But I said, Mama, what is it that you need? You're going to go spend the night. I said this on Tuesday. I flew in on Tuesday. My brother and I rented a trailer. We started loading up her furniture and taking it to this place. I said, you tell me what you need to get through the night. You know the first thing my mama said to me? 84 years old. She said, I got to have a TV. I said, Mom, you said TV before bed. You said TV before a chair, before a plate. She said, you better have my TV over at that little place. My brother worked like a dog to hook that TV. I carried it up those stairs, but my brother worked like a dog. You know why? Because my mama had to watch the little people. I don't even know what the little people are, I'll be honest with you. But she had to watch the little people on TV. What we think, it's interesting, what we think we need is not necessarily what we need. We have lost the difference between a need and a greed. And so you think about what you really need in life. That's what Paul's talking about. It's interesting that Perry's been to Israel, and some of you have traveled to Israel. In Israel, still to this day, the Bedouins, they're a tribe of people in the southern part of Judea. They travel around, they live in tents, and they're basically herders. They watch goats and things like that. And the reason they move around, they can't live in the same house, is because of the pasture land. So they move from place to place. Listen, y'all, it's the same way Abraham lived all those years ago. It's a black tent. It's made of animal hair, and you can see them off the side of the road, and sometimes at a distance. Bedouins still live in those tents. But if you look close enough, the Bedouins have antennas coming out of those tents. That even those people in Israel and Judea believe that somehow they need a television. Now, I'm not anti-television. This isn't my sermon. But what I'm saying is that I wonder we've changed. I'm talking about God's provision for our life. Paul said, I've learned to be content in whatever circumstances. You say it with me. Psalm 23, say it with me, the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. Folks, it is not a material thing. It is not what we have, it's whom we have. It has always been that. It has always been that. It is not what you have, it is whom you have. It is God that provides it. It is God. Paul would later on, and I'm going to teach this in just a second, he said, I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. The writer of Hebrews said, let your conduct be without covetousness and be content with such things as you have. He said, for he himself has said, I'll never leave you, I'll never forsake you, so that we may boldly say, the Lord is my helper. Why is it that we can be content? Because the Lord is my shepherd, because the Lord is my helper. It's because the Lord is with me. It's not what I have, it's whom I have. I have in my life the resource of every good gift. God is the giver of every good gift. It has nothing to do with that material possession. It has everything to do with the giver of those gifts. Contentment is not related to necessity. It has nothing to do with quantity, with how much you have. It never has. In fact, what I have learned, by the way, is that the more you have, it's just more to break down. The more toys you have is just more things. Haven't you? No, I talked about anxiety last week. A lot of the anxiety that's in your life is because of the things that God has given you. You prayed for those things and got those things, and now because you got acres of land, you still got to mow it. You still got to look after it. Some of the anxiety that we have in our life is because of some of the blessings that caused some of the burdens. Paul said, listen, I've learned to be content. I know what it's like to be in prosperity. Can I remind you all how Paul grew up? Remember, Paul grew up going to private schools. Paul grew up, man, he didn't want for anything. In fact, he would reach a Pharisee level. He would tell us that here in the book of Philippians. Paul knew what it was like to have anything he wanted at any time he wanted. But Paul also knew what it was like to have everything taken away from him and to be in a prison sitting by himself. Paul said it's got nothing to do with material things. It's got everything to do with God. What I have learned is, y'all, is that it is this relationship that Paul is talking about, not the material things in his life. Paul said, I know what it's like to go hungry, and I know what it's like to be filled. By the way, the word filled in the Greek text, it means to fatten an animal, to fatten a calf. He says, I know what it's like to have more than what I really need. And I also know what it's like to go hungry. I wasn't living at the time, but I read about the stock crash in 1929 that led to the Great Depression. Many of you know that not just the fact of losing something, but the thought of losing everything caused people to plummet to their death, to kill themselves. The thought that some material thing would be taken away from them. What was it Job said? Job said, naked I came into the world, naked I'm going to leave, blessed is the name of the Lord. You came in this world with absolutely nothing. The only thing that you need to leave with is what the world can't give you and what the world can't take away anyway. And so we need to put our provisions into that right. By the way, that's an interesting statistic. Last year, the Americans spent $70 billion on lottery tickets. $70 billion on lottery. I'm not going to ask you if you play the lottery, all right? I will tell you a funny story. A couple of years ago, somebody in this congregation thought they put their check in the offering plate, but they actually put a lottery ticket in the offering plate. It's a true story. They got home and they were laying their stuff on their dresser, and they laid their check on the dresser and said, I thought I put that in the offering plate. And she said, you put something in the offering plate. He goes, oh my goodness, I put my lottery ticket in the offering plate. And it was a losing ticket, by the way, and that made me angry. And $70 billion. Now, listen, I don't care whether you do that or not, but I do want to tell you something. The reason that more money was spent on more than movies, more than sporting events, more than music, more than everything on the lottery, it's because people think they need more. They think that somehow having more is going to make them happy, having a little bit more. They always say, well, I'm going to use it. I'm going to do good things with it. I'm going to help people with it. Have you ever read stories about the people that win the lottery? There's a guy that won $315 million. $315 million, he lost it in 4 years. He said the worst thing he ever did was win the lottery. And I'm not talking, listen, y'all, I'm not talking about, people are going to say, I have a sermon against the lottery. No, I'm not talking about that. He said the worst thing I ever did was win that lottery. I lost my daughter and granddaughter to overdoses. I got a divorce. My whole life has been about, for the last 4 years, material possessions, and I have got absolutely nothing to show for it. What he thought would make him happy made him absolutely miserable. It has nothing to do with our provisions. Contentment is something that's learned, by the way. You listen to people complain. You listen to them at work. Listen to them after this sermon is over. Listen to them in the restaurants. You listen to people complain. They're always complaining about what they don't have, what didn't happen. Just the hurt and the heartache of their life because everything is not always going their way. It's a lack of contentment when God is blessing them every day of their life. By the way, number one, you got to avoid comparisons. Stop comparing yourself to other people. Stop comparing yourself to other people. Paul said this in 2 Corinthians 10. He said, we don't dare to classify or compare ourselves with some who commend themselves, but when we measure themselves by themselves and compare themselves, they are not wise. Stop comparing yourself to other people. Stop comparing your house to somebody else's house. Stop comparing your body to somebody else's body. You do the best with what you have, what God has given you, but stop comparing yourself to other people. You heard about the story about the little pocket watch that wanted to be Big Ben. He looked up at Big Ben there by the Parliament over that river, and he said, if I could be like that clock, I know my life would be awesome. So someone tied a string to that little pocket watch and pulled him up so far in the air, so high, that absolutely no one could see him. His elevation became his annihilation. And somehow we think we need something more when we already have everything and more. We need to avoid comparison. Stop comparing yourself to other people. Secondly, lower your expectations. Lower your expectations. And by the way, I'm not talking about don't set goals. I'm talking about stop being entitled. Stop feeling entitled that somehow you're owed everything. You're blessed in your life. God has blessed you. He continues to bless you. If you feel that you are owed something, you will not be thankful for what you already have. If you don't appreciate what you already have, why would God give you something more? If you aren't thankful for $1,000, why would He give you $1 million? Be grateful for what you already have. You're miserable. Some of you are miserable inside, and your health is unbelievable. You came here, you run, you bounded around. There are people sitting in here that have cancer, that are going through chemo, do anything to trade places with you, but you have not said thank you not once today for your health. Make adjustments. Paul made adjustments in his life. We need to develop convictions. The last thing we need to do is we need to be confident in God's power. I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. Paul's philosophy of life, it ought to be yours too. I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. Let's say it together. I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. There, you learned a Bible verse today. You go and you quote that during the week. Paul didn't say I can do all things. He said I can do all things through Christ. The same Christ that Paul served is the same Christ that you serve. If Paul can say I can do all things through Christ, you can say I can do all things through Christ. I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. What Paul is saying is, listen, I'm going to be content. Whether you send me a gift or whether I don't have it. Whether I live in prosperity or I live hungry, I've learned to be content. Because my contentment has nothing to do with those material possessions. It has everything to do with the God who is giving those things. I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. Some of you have said, I can't for too long. I can't do this. I'm afraid to do this. I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. Galatians 2:20 said, I am crucified with Christ, nevertheless I live, yet not I. It's not me who lives, but Christ who lives in me. I love it. Listen to this in the J.B. Phillips translation. I am ready for anything through the strength of the one who lives in me. I love that. John 15, Jesus said, you can't do anything without me. With me, you can do nothing. And folks, we need to remember that with Him we can do all things, but without Him we can do absolutely nothing. I know it's about resources. It's about where our resources lie, and our resource is not in ourselves. Our resources are in the Savior. I wrote this in your outline. I like it. I've heard it for years, that your doctor may add years to your life, but only Jesus can add life to your years. He came to give you life, and He came to give it to you abundantly. We're going to sing it as well with my soul at the end of this lesson. And my prayer is that today it really is well with your soul. I've told you the story about how many years ago we used to have a drug alcohol rehab center over here called GRN. There was a woman that came from GRN and visited this congregation and was baptized. And she did really well for a while. And then she fell away, and she died in an abandoned building in downtown Atlanta. They called and asked if we could do the funeral service, and we said certainly we could. The funeral home cremated her body. By the way, her body was not turned over to a hospital, turned over to the coroner in downtown Atlanta. The funeral home for free went and got it, cremated her, and put her ashes in an urn. And some of us went to do her funeral. We sat in a little parlor there. They gave us a room. They didn't give us the chapel. And the reason they didn't give us a chapel is because at the same time that this woman died, one of the richest people in Snellville had died. His visitation was taking place next door to the service that I was trying to do, and people were so loud. There were so many people coming in and out. One of the wealthiest people, part of his name is on a lot of the buildings and signs in this community. The funeral home said, hey, we want to warn you about something here, that this girl had scribbled like a last will and testament, and she said that she wanted her ring, her only possession she had in her possession. She had a ring that her mother had given her and a paper clip and some change, and they said that she wanted this ring that her mother had given her to go to her little girl who was under the care of her family members. And so we want to honor that. And I said, well, why are you telling me that? And they said, well, some of her family's trying to get that ring so they can hawk it. And you need to protect it. And I said, you give me that ring, I'll take care of it. So while I preached her funeral, I held her earthly possessions in my hand, a paper clip and some change and that ring and a plush bag. And it hit me that when she died and the richest man in Snellville died, they left the same thing behind. Everything. Everything. The only thing that could go with them was their faith. So we're not giving it away and sharing it and sending it on ahead. What are we doing with our life? Why would God give us possessions that we aren't even content with, not satisfied? We have not taken the time to say thank you. Because in the end, we're not going to bring any of this with us. I went through my mama's house picking up things. Do you want this? Oh, she had a memory for everything. Y'all, please don't let your kids do this. Start getting rid of your junk now. I understand my mama's had that thing for 50 years. She hadn't looked at it or touched it. I said, Mama, you want this? Oh. I'm going to take that to Goodwill, Mama. I can't tell you how many things we threw away, took to Goodwill, whittling down a house of possessions into an apartment of possessions that one day we'll give away and get rid of. Y'all, we got to be content, to be satisfied with what God has given us. Before you go to bed at night, you need to thank Him. Man, thank Him for what He's done for you. Thank Him for what He's given you. Thank Him for how He's blessed you. He has done so much for us. But when we die, none of that's going to matter anyway. What we drive, where we live. The only thing that's going to matter is Him, not the thing. Him. I can do all things through Him. I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. Believe in Him. Trust Him. Give your life to Him. That you might believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God, being willing to be baptized and raised to walk in a new life, that you repent of your sins, that you give your life to Him once and for all. I want to tell you, I am learning the secret of contentment, and I'll continue learning it as long as I live. One day I'm going to be content when I'm with Him and I am like Him. But right now today, I'm grateful. I have everything I need. My daughter had our second grandson yesterday at 3:10. I started getting pictures of this handsome kid, more handsome than any other grandchild ever been born. You know that's not right. Malone held him, his little brother, yesterday. I went to bed last night and I said, God, You're so good to me. You're so good to me. We got money to send Kay to fly in an airplane to go to Denver to be there. You got food to eat in my house. You're so good to me. Forgive me for ever being discontent with what I have. I'll be here at the front. An elder will be with me. If we can help you in any way today, you come forward while we stand and sing this song of encouragement.